26,000 elite soldiers on one side and just 500 knights on the other, a ratio of 50 to 1. In any other century, this would be a massacre. But in 1177, at a dusty field called Montgisard, the impossible happened. At the center of the chaos stood a 16-year-old king whose body was literally falling apart from leprosy, facing down the most powerful sultan in the East. This wasn't just a battle of steel, it was a duel between a legendary conqueror at his peak and a dying boy who simply refused to fall. 1177. The Muslim world has found its champion, Saladin. He has forged an empire stretching from the Nile to the Tigris, uniting Egypt and Syria under a single golden banner. But one thorn remains lodged in his heart, the kingdom of Jerusalem. To Saladin, this tiny Christian enclave isn't just a military target, it's an insult to his faith. He knows the kingdom is at its weakest. King Amalric is dead, and the throne now belongs to a child, a sick child. Baldwin IV is only 16 years old, but his true burden is leprosy. The disease is slowly devouring him. He cannot feel his right hand. His feet are heavy with bandages. His own court sees it as a divine curse, praying for his death so a real leader can take over. They see a fragile boy. They don't see the steel in his eyes. When 26,000 elite Mamluks and Syrian infantry cross the border, a massive war machine designed to erase Jerusalem from the map, Baldwin's counselors beg for a siege defense. But Baldwin chooses defiance. He gathers the only men he can find, just 500 knights and a few thousand foot soldiers, and rides straight into the lion's mouth. The trap is set at Ascalon, a great stronghold on the road to Jerusalem. Baldwin manages to slip inside just before Saladin's vanguard surrounds the city. Now the 500 knights are locked in a cage. To Saladin, the war is over. He treats the Leper King like a nuisance, leaving a small detachment to block the gates, while the bulk of his 26,000 men continue towards a defenseless Jerusalem. Here, Saladin makes his biggest mistake of his life: arrogance. He allows his army to disperse, to loot villages and load themselves with booty. They become a disorganized horde, convinced the enemy is dying of fear behind stone walls. But inside Ascalon, Baldwin is watching. He sees the dust clouds split. He sees the opportunity that no one else dares to acknowledge. His barons beg him to stay, calling a sally suicide. But Baldwin listens only to Reynold of Chatillon, a man of vicious temper and military genius. Reynold knows the only way out is through. On the dawn of November 25th, the gates of Ascalon don't open for surrender. They burst open for an eruption. 500 knights, the flower of the kingdom's nobility, charge into the desert light. The sentries are silenced before they can scream. Baldwin's hunt has begun. At the head of this impossible force rides a 16-year-old boy who can barely hold the reins with his left hand, his face hidden behind a silver mask to mask his decay. But his eyes burn with a holy fire. They carry the true cross before them, a relic that transforms a military maneuver into a crusade of desperation. While Saladin's army is scattered across miles, drunk on easy victory and weighed down by loot, the lightning strike approaches. The Sultan is near Montgisard, relaxed and confident. His scouts have assured him the Child King is trapped, but arrogance is the poison of war. Suddenly, the ground begins to tremble. A low rumble on the horizon grows into a thunderous roar. 500 armored riders emerge from a cloud of dust like vengeful ghosts, the setting sun reflecting off their steel helmets, blinding the defenders. Panic is instantaneous. Saladin's soldiers are on foot, their weapons stacked, their horses grazing. The elite Mamluk guard desperately tries to form a line, but it's too late. Baldwin's charge does not strike the flanks, it strikes the heart. It is a steel hammer striking glass. The 500 knights tear through the camp like a hot knife through butter. There is no tactic here, only concentrated, holy violence. At the center of the storm is the silver mask of the king, leading his men straight toward Saladin's personal tent. The Sultan watches his invincible guard die around him, creating a wall of their own bodies just to give him seconds to escape. For the first time in his life, Saladin sees not an army, but the wrath of God. He mounted his fastest racing camel and flees for his life, abandoning his guard, his army, and his pride. The chase was no longer a battle, it was a human hunt. Saladin's 26,000 men, once a proud war machine, evaporated into the desert heat. Of that massive force, it is estimated that fewer than 3,000 ever saw Egypt again. 90% of his army was annihilated by an enemy 50 times smaller. When Saladin finally crossed the gates of Cairo, he was emaciated and humiliated. A conqueror returned with the dust of defeat in his mouth. He had committed the supreme sin of power. He had underestimated the boy. He saw the leprosy, but he missed the steel will burning beneath the bandages. Back in Jerusalem, the scene was ecstasy. Baldwin, the 16-year-old Leper King, who was never supposed to rule, let alone fight, entered through David's gate as a legendary hero. People wept and threw themselves at his feet, comparing him to the warrior kings of the Bible. But Baldwin was wiser than his years. He knew Montgisard wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the prologue to a much darker duel. He had bought his kingdom time, perhaps a decade, but he had also wounded a lion, and a wounded lion is the most dangerous predator of all. As the disease continued its relentless advance, stealing the sight from his eyes and the strength from his limbs, Baldwin began to rebuild his walls. He knew Saladin would return, no longer as an arrogant sultan, but as a methodical strategist seeking personal revenge. The miracle at Montgisard had saved the kingdom, but for the dying king, the true war had only just begun.